In May 2026, the world's largest aircraft carrier returned home after 326 days at sea. USS Gerald R. Ford had spent nearly 11 months away from Norfolk. Across that deployment, the ship recorded more than 12,000 flight launches. Its strike group took part in multiple operations, including Operation Epic Fury, during the final phase of the deployment. And when the carrier finally came home, Carrier Strike Group 12 received a Presidential Unit Citation. By almost every traditional measure, the deployment proved that the American supercarrier still mattered, which makes what happened next much more interesting. Because even as Ford was demonstrating what a modern carrier could still do, the U.S. Navy was already asking how the next one needed to change. That is the real carrier debate today. Not whether the aircraft carrier suddenly became useless. It did not. The harder question is how much the carrier has to evolve to remain worth building. Start with the scale. Gerald R. Ford is roughly 1,092 feet long. Its displacement is about 100,000 tons. It belongs to the first new American aircraft carrier class, introduced in more than 4 decades. From the outside, it still looks unmistakably like a supercarrier. A huge flight deck, a compact island, aircraft packed across an enormous moving runway. But some of the most important changes are hidden inside the ship, and one of them is surprisingly simple. Electricity. The Ford class was designed with roughly 3 times the electrical generating capacity of the Nimitz class. That is an enormous amount of electrical headroom, and it was not added by accident. A carrier built today has to remain useful in a world that does not exist yet. The aircraft will change, the sensors will change, the software will change, the systems consuming electrical power will change, and the ship may remain in service for half a century. That means engineers cannot design only for what the Navy needs today. They have to leave room for what the Navy may need decades from now. You can see that philosophy in Ford's flight deck. Older American carriers used steam catapults to launch aircraft. Ford replaced them with the Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, or EMALS. Instead of using steam to accelerate an aircraft down the deck, EMALS uses electromagnetic force. That gives the system finer control over acceleration and allows it to support a wider range of aircraft weights. The transition was ambitious, and it was not smooth. Ford's new launch and recovery technologies became some of the most closely watched parts of the entire program. But they also reveal something important about the ship. Ford was never meant to be just a larger Nimitz. It was designed around a different electrical architecture and a flight deck intended to generate more aviation activity with fewer sailors. The class was designed for a significantly higher sortie generation rate than its predecessor, roughly 1/3 higher as a design objective. That does not mean Ford automatically produces 1/3 more sorties every day. Real operations are more complicated than a design target. Weather matters, maintenance matters, aircraft availability matters, mission requirements matter, but the goal tells you what the Navy wanted. More aviation activity from the same basic idea. Because the ship itself is not the real point. The ship matters because of what leaves its deck. Fighters, electronic warfare aircraft, airborne command and control aircraft, and increasingly, a future mix that is likely to include more uncrewed systems. That is why aircraft carriers remain so difficult to replace with any one alternative. They are mobile air bases. They can reposition across the ocean. They can operate aviation without depending on a permanent foreign runway. And they can bring a large package of aircraft, maintenance, fuel, personnel, command systems, and support infrastructure with them. Ford's 2025 to 2026 deployment demonstrated that basic concept at enormous scale. Across the deployment, more than 12,000 flights were launched from the ship. That is the carrier argument in its simplest form. A moving runway can generate a remarkable amount of aviation activity, and the air wing itself is changing. FA-118 Super Hornets remain central to American carrier aviation. EA-18G Growlers provide electronic warfare capability. E-2D Advanced Hawkeyes support airborne command and control. F-35C integration adds another generation of carrier aircraft. And then there is MQ-25. The MQ-25 does not mean the carrier air wing is suddenly becoming unmanned, but it points toward a future in which uncrewed aircraft become a normal part of operations from the flight deck. That matters because the future carrier may look familiar from a distance while becoming very different up close. The hull may still be enormous. The flight deck may still look recognizable, but the mix of aircraft, sensors, automation, and electrical systems could change dramatically. And that brings us to the pressure pushing that evolution forward. Recent conflicts have demonstrated something navies cannot ignore. Relatively inexpensive uncrewed systems can create very expensive defensive problems. That does not prove a supercarrier is obsolete. It does not tell us that a small drone can simply defeat a carrier strike group. The real lesson is more complicated. The economics of naval defense are changing. A defender may sometimes have to use a relatively expensive interceptor against a much cheaper threat. That defense may work exactly as designed. The incoming threat may be stopped, but winning the interception is not always the same as winning the cost exchange. Survival is one problem. Surviving affordably is another. And this is where Ford's electrical architecture becomes more interesting. In October 2025, USS George H.W. Bush hosted a containerized directed energy demonstration that engaged multiple unmanned aerial vehicles. That was a test. It was not proof that laser systems are ready to replace conventional defenses, and it certainly did not mean American carriers suddenly had science fiction weapons capable of solving every problem around them. But it demonstrated why directed energy attracts so much attention. A conventional interceptor depends on a physical magazine. Once the ship has used what it carries, those weapons have to be replenished. Directed energy works differently. Its attraction is not magic. It is economics. If electrical power can replace some expendable interceptors in certain situations, then the cost equation begins to change. And suddenly, all that electrical headroom built into Ford looks less like excess and more like insurance. EMALS needs electricity. Sensors need electricity. Future aircraft systems will need electricity. Automation needs electricity. And future defensive systems may need even more. The carrier's most important future resource may not be something visible on the flight deck. It may be electrical power, but there is an important limit to that argument. Lasers are not magic either. They still have to operate in the real world. Weather matters. Moisture matters. Sea spray matters. Heat management matters. And harder, faster threats create a much more demanding technical problem than a small, uncrewed aircraft. The physics are promising. The operational problem is harder. Directed energy may eventually change part of the economics of naval defense. It has not eliminated the physics of the ocean, and it has not settled the bigger survivability debate. No public source can tell us exactly how a carrier strike group would perform in the most demanding possible conflict. That depends on too many variables, and many of the most important details are not public. What we can say is that a carrier does not operate as one isolated hull. It operates inside a larger system. Aircraft, escort ships, sensors, logistics, communications, networks, maintenance, and thousands of people. The survivability question belongs to that entire system, not just the carrier. That distinction matters because the debate often reduces a supercarrier to one giant target. But that is not how the Navy actually uses it. At the same time, the critics of the supercarrier are asking a legitimate question. How much capability should one nation concentrate into a single ship? The lead Gerald R. Ford cost roughly $13 billion to procure. That is an extraordinary investment in one hull, and the cost does not stop when the ship enters service. It requires an air wing, escorts, maintenance, training, shipyard capacity, specialized suppliers, and decades of support. At that scale, small design decisions become expensive decisions, and schedule problems matter too. The second Ford-class carrier, John F. Kennedy, has experienced significant delays. That matters because an aircraft carrier takes years of industrial effort to build. These are not ships that can be ordered today and delivered next year. They consume enormous amounts of labor, engineering, manufacturing capacity, and time. So the carrier debate is not only about whether a ship can survive, it is also about whether concentrating this much money, labor, and industrial capacity into one platform continues to make strategic sense. And this is where the debate stops being theoretical. Because the strongest evidence that the carrier has to evolve is not coming from its critics. It is coming from the Navy. The service is reviewing the design baseline for CVN-82, a future Ford-class carrier. The stated goals include improving survivability, improving producibility, simplifying parts of the design, and potentially reducing cost. That is a very important signal. The Navy is not abandoning the Supercarrier. It continues to invest in Ford-class ships. But it is also not pretending that the current design can simply be copied forever without change. Ford worked, the environment changed, and now the design is being reconsidered. That does not necessarily mean CVN-82 will look dramatically different from Gerald R. Ford. It may still be recognizably part of the same class, but the systems inside it, the way it is built, the aircraft operating from it, and the defensive technologies supporting it may continue to evolve. The same is true of the air wing. The future is unlikely to be a simple choice between crewed aircraft and uncrewed aircraft. It will probably be a mix. Crewed fighters may operate alongside increasingly capable uncrewed platforms. Tankers may become uncrewed. Sensors may become more distributed. Aircraft may carry different roles across a wider network. And the carrier may increasingly function less as one giant independent weapon and more as the center of a constantly changing aviation and information system. That is why the idea that drones have simply killed the carrier misses the point. And the idea that the carrier can remain unchanged misses it too. The carrier did not suddenly become obsolete. The cost of challenging it began to fall. The air wing is changing. The defensive problem is changing. The industrial cost is changing. So the carrier has to change too. Gerald R. Ford did not settle the carrier debate. It made the debate more interesting. The ship demonstrated that mobile sea-based aviation still has real operational value. But relevance alone is no longer enough. The next carrier also has to be adaptable. It has to be buildable. It has to be supportable. And it has to survive in an environment filled with technologies that were barely imagined when the first Nimitz-class carrier entered service. That may be the most important lesson of Ford. Not that the supercarrier has reached its final form, but that a ship designed to serve for decades has to keep changing long after it leaves the shipyard. So here is the question. If the carrier still gives the Navy something it cannot easily replace, how much should the next one change? Should the Navy keep concentrating more capability on one giant nuclear-powered carrier? Or should more of that capability gradually move into uncrewed aircraft and a wider network of ships and systems? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoy fact-based stories about naval aviation, military technology, and the engineering behind American defense, like the video and subscribe to Defense TV. The supercarrier is not disappearing. It is being forced to evolve. The question is whether that evolution can move faster than the world around it.